Yukon's Upper Columbia Program Manager. And I will introduce Michele Sam more fully in a moment. But Michele Sam is our presenter today. So now is the time to take a few minutes and introduce yourself in the chat, where you're from, and maybe a few words about your interest in Indigenous-led conservation.
Can we also, sorry, Candace, but can we first ask those hereditary chiefs or chiefs that are in the rooms to identify themselves, please?
Yep.
I have a green light just go on that says share the screen. Should I click on that?
No.
No.
No, okay.
I did see that Chief Joe Pierre is here.
Okay.
So thank you for your presence, Chief Pierre. Any others? Okay. So maybe we'll go there. I have my whole list of things here. So just to let you know, this session is being recorded, but not the breakout rooms, just the presentation aspects here. So go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat, where you're from, and a few minutes about your interest in the topics or Indigenous-led conservation generally. But once Michele starts, we'll be only using the chat for posing questions. That will not be a time to continue with self-introductions. And so Candace and Nadine are in Nelson and Silverton, BC, which is in Amakas Ktunaxa, which is shared with the Secwépemc, Sinixt, and Silks Okanagan peoples. We're in Nelson and Silverton. And we welcome you. We've had wonderful interest in this webinar. The numbers just keep rolling up there. So this is the largest we've had so far, which is wonderful. And again, with the other workshops, this is our 5th workshop in the Ethical Space series, and we're seeing many, many sectors represented. So that's very exciting. All kinds of governments, all kinds of people working in various fields, and everybody's very, very welcome. So, you know, Zoom etiquette, most folks are used to that by now. Please keep yourself muted except in the breakouts. Keep your cameras on during the Q&A sessions, and then look after yourselves. You know, don't stare at your computer for 90 minutes straight. Look away, look at the sun. You can try turning off self view, which you can find by clicking the 3 dots in the upper right hand of your own little box, and that will help your brain quite a bit. I mentioned this is 5th in the series. The other recordings are on our website at y2y.net ethical space. I think Nadine is going to put that in the chat. And the objectives of the series are 3. These are learning experiences largely for non-Indigenous people about Indigenous authority, to build relationships among us all, and to set us up more effectively to work together and support Indigenous-led conservation and beyond, and reconciliation more broadly, I think. So we're seeking to have deeper understanding of frameworks and concepts, and also to have a sense of being part of a network of peers that are engaging with these questions, to bring inspiration, empowerment, and support for taking steps individually and within our organizations and our domains. And I really feel like that feeling is growing, especially over the courses of, especially over the series. So that's a good feeling. And I just wanted to say that today is asking more of you as participants than perhaps previously. There was more pre-reading, and you will be spending more time in the breakouts, and people have been asking for this, to dive a little deeper, and perhaps to be slightly more even accountable. So there'll be 2 presentation chunks and 2 breakout sessions, and then a plenary Q&A, or actually 3 presentation chunks. So things will be broken up through the agenda. So thank you for being on this journey with us, and we look forward to engaging with your open hearts and open minds. And now I'm going to introduce Michele. We're very happy to welcome Michele Sam today. Michele is Ktunaxa Aksmaknik, a Ktunaxa human being, and she has been inspired to consider self-development as an act of freedom, a result of being one of the 60s Scout kids, and whose 5 generations before her all attended St. Eugene's Mission School. Michele returned to her people almost 30 years ago, and she lives and works in her homelands. She has a MSW in social work and has completed coursework, comprehensive exams, and proposal defense for her PhD studies. Michele will take you on a heartfelt intellectual journey and lead you through a pragmatic attempt at reconciliation. So thank you very much, and over to you, Michele.
Thank you. Kisuk Wishnam Kapiniskis. Oh, my phone starts ringing. That's hilarious. I have asked a Ktunaxa Akasenka member on this call, Francis. I don't know if you can hear me, or if you saw my chat, my request, if you would provide us with opening words, which is our tradition. I was told that when there's when we get together, when Ktunaxa get together, that we should be saying some opening words. Can you do that, Francis, for us?
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank
Okay.
you.
I'm glad to take about 3 minutes of your guys' time. Welcome. Thank you. All that good stuff. Good weather all over. Sukat kokni na wasan mitki klat it kawakam at smakniknas. Hakat mukwait at ya kawak muhoki. Sar takti sar takik samtisik na paski na. Kamakasok ni khan sar hisuk sar saatik pasniho. Da kapeniskirnik in inkit suyapi aktsmaknik paski nintik stit katnintik. Sar hisuk taklakusar sin kapaski yachnasha. Aye.
Thank you, Francis. I wanted to acknowledge Nasukan Joe Pierre, who is Nasukan for the band that I am legally registered to. Joe, I don't know if you have, if you're able to unmute and just take a minute.
Yeah, Kisakwishnam Kapiniskich. So good morning to everyone. Just expressing my gratitude this morning for the space that's being created for people to come and listen to the great speakers that have already come before Michele. And I know that today Michele is going to challenge us and probably entertain us as well. Michele is quite funny. I like her sense of humor. But what I really like about Michele is the way that she thinks and the way that she challenges with her thinking. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation today.
Hey.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. So I create space for others is a big thing. It's an issue of validity, validation of knowledge, and the fact that what you have today is a Ktunaxa perspective. I don't represent Ktunaxa. We don't have a representative democracy as Ktunaxa people. We're being impacted by that representative democracy. But when I look at all of the archival work and the reports, I know that we all stand up and we all say our piece. And that comes out of, hopefully, many of you got the opportunity to read the creation story. And just a quick hands up if you got to read the homework. Yeah. Oh, look at that.
Most of it.
So,
most of it.
My students often, when I've been teaching, they either love me or hate me, but they all said the same thing. They do the most reading for me because I do challenge. I'm trying to grow people that I can work with, that we don't have to be like this, that we can actually figure out how we work together and how we can do this in a really, really good way. Joe's mom, Sophie, told me once that, you know, if we're doing good, everybody else is going to do good. Right? If we're not doing good, nobody's going to do good. Things are going to fall apart. And so that's because we're in our homelands and we have a certain amount of responsibilities. And so, oh, Candace, I'm sorry, I forgot to turn on my my timer, but I'm going to turn it on right now so we can go 20 minutes from now. Just kidding. Our time together, I don't expect, I'm not reading slides. I really don't like when people are reading their slides. So just so you know, I'm going to try to engage as many of your inputs as I possibly can. I'm a bit of a brain nerd. I like brains. And I'm going to try to bring you from the back of your brain, from the fight, flight, food, and the rest of the F words, to the front, to the executive functioning, to the place where we think about forward thinking, right? And that all happens in the front of your brain, actually. So when we're talking about forward thinking, we're actually trying to move us forward. But I do want to acknowledge that Indigenous peoples' relationships to our homelands and waterways have been impacted. That is an attachment that has been purposefully severed. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. And so these are some of the things that we're going to talk about. Some of these will be new terms for you. I don't expect everybody to get everything. And when Candace and I were arranging this, she was like, oh, you know, can we get to this answer? You know, how do we get to this answer? And I said, that's not up to me. That's not up to me. That's up to you. That's your responsibility. My responsibility is to get to my answers. Your responsibility is to get to your answers. And then maybe we can have a chat, right? Maybe we can talk. So this isn't the best way of doing this, but we're going to do it anyways, right? Yeah, we're good. You all had coffee? Excellent. Good, good, good. Excuse me. So some things to consider. And so these are some of the people that I've learned from, either through reading, or through mentoring, or through exposure to ideas, and as well as at the bottom there, or the middle part, this part, I don't know if you can see my cursor. Can you see my cursor? Yeah, okay. These are the principles that I am guided by. And when I came home in 1998, there were people still alive who had held knowledge and shared knowledge with me that helped me to come home, to be reattached to place. And Joe, and I don't know who else is on here, but you might recognize this. This is from the hike we did through the Earl Grey Pass in 1998. And so I've got a few pictures of place in here, places that are important to me and things that I see. And so, so how do I come to know anything? Basically, I'm Ktunaxa on my mother's side. I'm Haudenosaunee and Italian on my father's side. We do not have a community that claims us on that side because it's a few generations ago. But when I met him, he explained to me that that's where we came from and said to follow my mother. My daughter is Anishinaabe. I was blessed to be taken in by an Anishinaabe family in Northwestern Ontario when I attended Lakehead University. And the people there helped me a lot. And in fact, brought one of our elders to Thunder Bay to bring me home. And I was adopted into a Dutch immigrant family. So I'm very direct. I don't mean to offend. If I offend you, please talk to me about that. And we can work through that. And so I often think, you know, if I spoke Ktunaxa, it might sound prettier, some things, than trying to say it in English. And because English can be such a funny dialect. And so I went to university and I learned a whole bunch of different ways to see the world, including understanding better Indigenous philosophies or Indigenous worldviews. And so I completed some coursework. I'm not going to go through that, but this just gives you the credentialing and the spaghetti behind the name, is how people have been saying it to me. And so I do have some spaghetti, and I also have some publications, and continuing to look at publications and how to get information and knowledge out for folks to be useful. This is a quote that was came out while I was a student at Lakehead University. And it was from a lawyer who was involved in the land claims with Canada and advising Canada. And there are Indigenous philosophers who really talk about the land determines the personality of the people, and that it's very much the land has personality. We probably call those ecosystems now, but they have personalities. And as Ktunaxa, of course, we have a belief in Akamaskapikapsen, which is all living things, of which human beings, you know, the younger brothers and sisters, we have a responsibility because Nathmutsen, because Yawunik left, right? And actually Nathmutsen, I'm sorry, did not leave, but he transformed. And so he's still here for us. And I think helping and guiding us. And so this is very much the situation of intractable conflict that we live. It's in all aspects of our lives. We tend to look at it issue by issue or by sector without really understanding the holism of how this happens and how conflict becomes embedded and over time. And so one of the opportunities I had in my growing was to work on the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, which is 5 volumes. And I had been asked to work on urban Aboriginal housing research. And I was really put off by the fact I had to call it urban Aboriginal when I knew I was in Anishinaabe homelands, and that I wanted to be able to do this according to Anishinaabe homelands. And so I did the report anyways. We had good conversation with Anishinaabe leadership, spiritual leadership, cultural practitioners. And when the report came out, I was really struck by this last quote in volume 3 around the role of research and information in our self-development, self-determination, and nation rebuilding. And so this is a quick map to show you, to sort of ask you to suspend your disbelief, to decenter where you are and what you know of the place around you. And this is a map I often use with folks because it shows the gray zones. And when we talk about strategic regional competition, it's actually a war term, strategic competition. And it is the pre-war conflict. It's the setting up of conflict. And in this case, though, before contact, we had agreements as Indigenous peoples, as nations, with each other around how we were going to share resources, share opportunities, as well as address conflicts and social norms. And so I don't know about you, but for, you know, if you can figure out where you are, whose homelands you are, that's great. And if you have never seen this map before, Google Indigenous Peoples maps, because there's lots out there about territories. And so one of the biggest things we have to acknowledge, right, is if we're going to talk about resolution, reconciliation, any of these terms, we have to actually acknowledge there is a conflict. And most people we're not okay with that. We don't get taught that. So my background is also in early childhood education. So I like to teach toddlers, 18 months to 3 years old, right? Oh, they're driving you crazy. I love them at that age. And they're a lot like me, I think, because we ask why, and we're unrelenting. We want to know why something is happening. We also have a pretty good sense of humor, but we're also challenged with how to get along with people. And I put myself in there because sometimes I'm like, why is this happening? And so part of that is understanding for ourselves as Indigenous people that reconciliation and resolution is not just for non-Indigenous people, it's for ourselves as well. And understanding and coming to understand colonialism and imperialism, and understanding that system of dominance, that colonization is a tool of imperialism. And so when we start with decolonization, are we actually going far enough? And I'm not going to answer that question. Well, maybe I will. So we're going to talk very, very quickly about whiteness as a system and as a system of dominance coming from, right, and coming in, and how that reshapes our relationships, how that has reshaped the fact that I'm speaking English, even though Ktunaxa is my mother tongue. You know, the fact that I've been educated and yet I don't always have the same access to my own culture and language, right? The fact that Ktunaxa language is an endangered language, even though we are still speaking it. These are all signs of that domination, right? Over time, that intractable conflict over time. When we bring other people's knowledge systems, for example, the two-eyed seeing, and we suggest, oh, this worked in Mi'kmaq territory, we're going to bring it over here and use this with the Ktunaxa, without any consideration for what a Ktunaxa model might look like. We are actually doing an intellectual imperialism, right? So I can only see a certain amount of you. So I apologize if I keep staring at you. And so whiteness is a standpoint, it's a perspective, right? And it is something that we, people of color, myself as an Indigenous person, I'm struck with all the time. The fact that I was adopted is a purposeful shift towards making me follow a whiteness ideology. I was born and raised in Toronto. I was with my mother, then I wasn't. I was raised as the youngest of 7 children, Dutch Catholic, immigrant children. I didn't even know there was a reserve up the road from me until probably about 20 years ago, when I all of a sudden went, oh, because there were 10 of us actually in high school with me that we just didn't talk about it. We all found each other, but we didn't talk about it. And I don't even think would have known what to say to each other. And so white fragility and white privilege come to support that norm, right? So white fragility being unable to deal with the conversation of race. That's why a lot of places right now are really having the conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Sometimes diversity, equality, and inclusion, where cancel culture comes from. And I'm just going to say I'm not a proponent of cancel culture, because I myself have been in that process of being canceled in my own homelands. And so that's a larger conversation for another talk. But basically, when people talk about, oh, we need to get rid of those reserves, you're segregating yourself. Well, that's not our system. We didn't put ourselves on that reserve. Actually, those reserves, that segregation, that ideology is actually coming from that system of whiteness. So that embedded these things for us. And so that's part of the conflict is for us to understand that as well, right? So if we're unfortunately named banned, right, that community. And so looking at disconscious racism, which basically is a dysfunctional consciousness that ascribes to white norms, right? That system of dominance, of thinking, and then taking that on as our own. And I'm hoping we're going to get right to the thing. So this is, I don't know how many of you have been in my homelands, just outside of, well, actually on OCAP. And so this is a picture of what I like to think of as before contact. It is a modern picture, of course, but before contact, what this would have looked like. I have 7 minutes on my clock, just telling you. And then we had to deal with the federal policies, right? The thinking about us, the view of us, the view of my people, Ktunaxa. And these are the principles that they acted upon. And this is what we got. We got the residential school for starters. And the transformation of our landscape, the transformation of our beingness, right? I hope this is stark for you. I hope that you can see that difference and that it touches you, because that's very much what I'm hoping to provide you in some of these pictures, is to see, because sometimes it's hard to see me as a Ktunaxa, right? Because we're socialized to see, right, the Indian, the Indigenous, all of these other pieces as well. And so how did this happen? Well, this happened through the historical legal relationships that are continuing today. And this was originally conceptualized and put together by Dennis McPherson from Lakehead University, who held the very first, I think, Native philosophers program funded by Rockefeller in Canada, and I think even in North America. So I got a little spoiled in my undergraduate with a whole bunch of Indigenous philosophers sitting around the Native Student Lounge and just started talking. And it was amazing to be surrounded by deep thinkers. And so we see how we become treaty and non-treaty. We see how we were heterogeneous Indigenous peoples, and where we've become state identified heterogeneous groups of people. And then the place, right, through the provincial governments, where become urban and reserved Indians. Now we're right back up here to treaty and non-treaty. And this is what it looks like, excuse me, sorry. And this is what it looks like. So the red dots are the reserve communities, over 600 of them across Canada. You'll notice that they're not really in this area because they have a different system in the territories, of course. You see in BC, the concentration of where the reserves are, and they were set up structurally to support development. And they were based on this idea, right? That there's a nationhood, there is a community constructed, there is a extended family. Some of you might notice Leo Williams here, and that's my son who just turned 18. So this is how they used to spend a lot of their time. The social construction of women and children, and then the child in the middle. And it's an ageist system. And it's also a system that kind of looks like it might be indigenous or might fit for us. But I'm here to tell you, as a 60 scoop kid, you can remove me from my community, from my family, from my extended family, from my nation, and you will lose me. And you did. My people lost me on purpose through policy. And so many of us have been lost. And so I think now I have 3 minutes. And so when I went back to university, and I've done a lot of different pieces of research, and so I came across this paper around research ethics and how, you know, basically the social policy really determines what the priorities are and how we're going to be looked at. And so when I start looking at the UN Declaration, for example, hopefully you all got a chance to take a look at that 2-pager, really brief one that's written by the Indian Policy Organization in the States. I found that one to be the most succinct, but I hope you also spend time reading the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People with the Indigenous people where you live and work. So that's your unassigned homework. And so where that started from was from Indigenous people. And they were not heard at the UN. And so they kept going back, kept going back, kept going back. And then finally, you know, through their intervention, through their lobbying, they developed the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. It's not the UNDRIP. It's not the UNDRIP, and I'll talk a little bit about that. It is the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And so some of the shifts in this is the right to self-determination in relationship to place that differs, that sets us apart from other minorities, right? Because as Indigenous people, we are connected to place. The other piece, and why I've been told, Chief Ed John, Grand Chief Ed John, who was really instrumental in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, told me, you make sure you use that term every single time, because they fought to get the term people into the declaration, because in international law, that implies the right to self-determination. And when we call it UNDRIP, we're actually doing a great disservice for the Indigenous peoples, because we are peoples. And that term peoples has been kept from us since contact. We're Indians, right? We're, you know, Aboriginals, we're natives, not people. And that is a huge piece around understanding our humanity. Free, prior, informed consent. Most of you are probably used to this one because that's the most famous article. But that was the article that actually supported the development of the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, because Indigenous people pulled back and said, no, we're not doing this because you're not listening. And so they stopped the process until the nation states listened and brought the Indigenous people back. That is the applied free, prior, and informed consent. The last article to be added was Article 3, which is about the right to self-determination. And that's, I think, where all of you come in when we start talking about, you know, initiatives, lands and place-based initiatives, and the kind of work that we're really trying to do together, as well as to understand, you know, why aren't they buying into what we're trying to do? It's so great. Because it actually is about our self-determination and coming back to what we need to know. So I think I'm going to stop there. I have a few more, what do you call it? I have a few more reports, but I'm going to wait until after we're done this first breakout.
Great, thank you very much, Michelle. Wonderful. So what we are going to do now is we are going to put you into breakout rooms. We had hoped they would be small, but because there is so many of you, you're probably going to have 4 to 5 people all together with you. And I think Nadine is going to put the questions in the chat. So you'll be, and we're going to give you a couple of warnings. So 5 minutes, 2 minutes, and then there'll be 30 seconds and it'll bring you back to the main for Michelle's second presentation. So the questions are going to be in the chat momentarily, but they are around conflict. So there you see, how is conflict characterized? How comfortable are you with conflict? And then strategic regional competition in your own work. So please take advantage of this 10-minute slot to talk with some of your peers about how these concepts and experiences. Right, Michelle.
Sorry, she muted me. I was like, I'm here, I'm here.
You got to watch that, Nadine, I tell you. She's a trickster.
I got to tell you a quick story. My adoptive family and all of us had a Zoom Christmas, and I got to host it. So I got to press mute for my entire family. Let me tell you, it was the most empowering Christmas I've ever had. Anyways. So welcome back. I hope that was a good conversation for all of you. I hope that you got to meet somebody new and hear some ideas around what we all deal with, which is the conflict. I just have a very blurry, sadly, but a very blurry picture here of Starry Night. Many of you may be familiar, as well as with an actual Starry Night by technology. With one of those lenses that takes a picture every moment. And it's just about perspectives. And so I often think about Van Gogh, and perhaps some of our most creative people aren't actually mentally unhealthy. They just see things very, very differently. And wouldn't it be amazing if he was alive now to see this sort of rendition of the Starry Night, right? And how he was painting and being creative. So I hope that inspires you to think something about what the conversation that you just had. And so I want to talk a little bit about the conflict, right? And the fact that in order to have resolution or reconciliation, we need to acknowledge the conflict exists. And so I'm just going to go quickly over. Hopefully you have seen the Truth and Reconciliation Calls to Action. Hopefully you have seen or are supporting the Indigenous people where you live to go through those calls and how you can act upon those in partnership perhaps, and learn about how those calls actually may look differently in that area than it would actually in my own homelands and across my homelands as well. And there's 94 of those calls to action. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about this report, which, you know, I don't know how many of you, just how many of you in the work you do in environmental based focus have actually thought about the murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls in terms of your work. Yeah, so I can't see very many hands. I see a couple. And I would encourage you to think about this, because the report, the name of the report is Reclaiming Power and Place. And if that doesn't encourage you to come into the fold of this conversation, then we really need to start looking at the definition of place. And so I encourage you to go through and take a look, as it's focused on Indigenous women and girls and two-spirited, lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, questioning, intersexual, and asexual. And I hope I got that acronym correct, because I have been, it is a learning moment for me, and it is understanding the terminology and being able to use that terminology to support that space. And so there includes calls to extractive and development industries in these calls to action for the murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. And I could be a little bit influenced by this because my mother is one of them. I never met my mother again, and this is not unusual. I'm willing to bet that every Indigenous family sooner or later has a relation who is missing in this way, just as they are missing through the residential school, just as they are missing through the 60 scoop. So this is a great graphic. Lots of people like this one. Lots of people use this one. And so it talks about the equality, right? Everybody gets the same box, right? To be able to see over the fence, to watch the parade. It's a very hidden whiteness in this one. And so then you get into the equity, right? So, okay, so this little guy needs more boxes. We're good with that, right? But the fence is still up and we're still watching the parade. And then we have the justice frame, which is like, you know what? Let's get rid of the fence. Let's put all our effort in, get rid of the fence. And then the liberation, yay, we all get to watch the parade. Now, for myself, in Cranbrook, we have a Sam Steele parade every year. And Sam Steele was the contemporary of my great-great-great-grandfather Isidore. And Sam Steele was brought here to settle the uprising of the Ktunaxa in our homelands when we were being put on the reserves. And it was his generation that the social responsibilities, the opportunities for him to continue being our leader the way that he was, and our social infrastructure was impacted. And so I think about this, and I think about this idea of liberation, and I'm like, you know what? I don't want free access to watch a parade that's celebrating something that is about the dominance and the imperialism upon my life. And so we have to go further. We have to move further. We have to think forward. And so there's this great prophecy from 1969, a year after I was born. So I turned 53 next week. I know I look way younger and I sound younger, and I'm actually put together and put makeup on because my sister always tells me I should. Otherwise I look like I just came out of high school, or not high school, but university. Anyways, there is this prophecy about the eagle has landed on the moon would signify the revitalization, the reemergence of Indigenous peoples' belief systems. And so that was the headline of the newspapers. The eagle has landed. And I just want to acknowledge the role of trickster and transformation, because I don't think anybody expected it to be like that. And so for us as Ktunaxa, at that time was also when we began our nation rebuilding. We got rid of the Indian agent left. We started to have our leadership, our intellectual leadership, a lot of whom since passed on, start to go around the country, go around the province, and trying to understand what happened and what can we do? What can we do differently? And so this is where we really are now. So you'll recognize these gray lines, right? These fuzzy boundaries, the gray zones. Gray zones is a strategic competition term for pre-war. When you look at the Middle East, for example, a lot of people, you know, I kind of wish I did international relations when I was in university, because for Indigenous people in Canada, it really is international relations, because we are nations with boundaries and shared boundaries, and we have been impacted, and we need to relearn, recreate those boundaries again, and understand, you know, what and how, given the context of, you know, the development around us, right? The competition for resources, the land claims, the treaty, you know, all of these systems that are set up upon us and upon our context. And so to try to understand that better. And so I can't see the chat, so I'm a little distracted by it. I want to share with you some words from Daniel Wildcat, who co-authored a book with Vine Deloria Jr., who's passed on, who again is another major influence on my thinking, around the fact that we, as I'm sitting here with the beadwork that I'm wearing in my homelands, that I never thought I would ever see 30 years ago, 40 years ago, that I am a living testimony of the power of my people, of the power of my place, of the relationships that are continue, of the belief systems that are still in play, and that we don't fit comfortably. Those reports tell you that. And so how we use those reports is really, really key and important. And for a lot of our people, they don't get to see those reports, or they don't know, you know, it's such a big report. How do I read through this? And so in some cases, part of the role and responsibility between us is to share knowledge, right? That comes from our creation story where, you know, Nipika calls all living things together. Hey, and I'm paraphrasing, the human beings are coming. What are you going to do about it? Right? And in that creation story, if you read that, every single, or you heard Joe tell it, every single one stands up and says, I will do this if you do this. And that is about the ability to respond, right? And I was saying this in the breakout, the responsibility, it's not a shaken finger. You need to be responsible. It's about, this is coming. I need the ability to respond to what's coming this way. I need the skills. I need to be able to understand. I need the people around me. And so I want to just acknowledge again the Ktunaxa who opened for me, because when I got told there was almost 400 people registered for this, I freaked out. Just going to say it. So complex change is what we're all involved in. The fact that COVID is happening is a conflict, you know, is a complex change on top of the complex change we're dealing with. And so ideally, we can get the complex change to happen when we have these things in place. But quite often, we are missing some of those. And for Indigenous people, I think quite often we're missing the resources. We forget our vision, what was told to us, right? Often our stories, our creation story, our ceremonies, our deep culture, we haven't been raised that way. That's where our vision comes from. And we have to bring that back to the forefront. We have to be able to do that and have faith in our own belief systems again. And the skills, right? To have the skills to have a conversation like this. I forget sometimes that I have skills that I can actually talk to 400 people and do it okay. And make some of you laugh and smile and touch your hearts, but also touch your minds and get you to think. Sometimes I forget that. And so understanding those pieces, helping to find the action, the fact that action isn't just your body moving, action happens in your brain. Action happens when your synapses solidify through experience, because they're experientially dependent, right? Your experience sculpts your brain. And so I want to talk a little bit about that experience, about culture, the role of culture, right? Because quite often I'm cultured, but when I meet people, they're not. So I'll remind you of the whiteness, right? That conversation about the whiteness in the first section. Because we are all cultured. I have a dog. I have 2 cats. I have houseplants that are growing. I own a home. I'm a single mother. I'm a single mother of 2 children with genetic differences. I'm the single mother of a boy and a girl. I am a single mother, female-headed household, right? Solely dependent on my income. I'm a business owner. I'm Ktunaxa. I'm a Ktunaxa Aksmaknik. I'm Ktunaxa Pashki, of Ktunaxa woman. There's a whole bunch of different ways and different cultures that I actually walk in and out of. I'm a heterosexual. I have a bow, right? Not the bow, that kind of bow. I use the old term for partner. I'm the oldest of 7 sisters and a brother. I'm the youngest of 5 brothers and a sister. These are all actual systems of culture, and they have ways of perpetuating itself. It has knowledge, right? The production of knowledge, the how your culture gets activated, right? In my adoptive family, for example, there's certain things that I can't do there that I can do as a Ktunaxa. There are things as a Ktunaxa that, you know, I can't do in other places. I'm aware of that. I respect, you know, when we talk about Indigenous peoples, I fear for that because I don't want us to lose our uniquenesses that are place-based, that are the personality of the place, the waterways that provide us the opportunity to become who we are. And so what often happens though is when we're looking at somebody else, we're socialized with a whole bunch of ideas about what that person is. How many of you got to read the one about Coyote and the Mirrors? Yeah, did you like it? I hope you liked it. That's very much about that mirror image. That mirror I was given was that whiteness mirror. And it did almost break me. I have post-traumatic stress disorder. I have tried to kill myself because I could never reflect that mirror. And that's common. That is a common experience when you don't get to see yourself reflected in the people, in the places, in the opportunities that are around you, right? That's when people talk about, you know, walking in two worlds, are young people, but they're not learning about themselves either. So it becomes this foggy mirror that, what do you do? So that becomes an internalized perception that perpetuates and can set up that disconscious racism, right? I can take off my earrings. I can take off the things that look materially like a culture. But I've also been socialized, and people have been socialized to continue to see me as an Indigenous woman, right? Or as an Indian woman, as a Native woman, as an Aboriginal woman. I can't ever walk away from that. I can't hide. Oh, I got 4 minutes. And so there's an interaction between these cultures, right? And so I just got to tell you, I get to go to Oxford, which is very weird for me, but I do get to go to Oxford, and I do these talks over in Oxford at the Center for the Resolution of Intractable Conflict. And I got to meet Lord Alderdice. I can tell you stories about that. But I went up and I walked Salisbury Hill, which is, if any of you know Peter Gabriel's song, Salisbury Hill, it's when he left Genesis. If you haven't heard that song, please play it for yourself. It's beautiful. And it's all about letting go. And so I walked up Salisbury Hill because I wanted to have this epiphany, right? Because I was really questioning, what do I have to offer the world? And I got up there, and it's a sacred site. And it has a plaque up there and everything. But they have a herd of cows up there, and there was like cow plops everywhere. And I was just like, oh my God, here's my epiphany. You know, the universe is calling bullshit on my self-doubt. But I wanted to talk about the fact that they are talking about decolonization there very seriously, and recognizing the legacy they have globally in terms of colonization and imperialism. And so when I talk like this, it's often in the role of identity, right? The crossing of cultures and places of relationships, which is where we have really great conversations and can recognize our boundaries. And so this is what it looks like for us where I am speaking about as Ktunaxa, right? You see the lines, the international border. I haven't been able to see Francis in a very long time. My ancestry, I understand, came from this area. I'm named after a headman who ended up in this area, who because of flu epidemic ended up in this area, where they married into this area, and now I'm in this area. And so my relationships cross all of the bands when I do my genealogy. And so I see everybody's moving around. And I just want to leave on this because I'm not sure if Manulani is on this call, but Summer, I think, is on here, Hawaiian academic and scholar. And Manulani Meyer is an academic, a Hawaiian academic who has had a huge influence on me about going back to Ktunaxa knowledge and pulling it, understanding it at that deeper level of what it teaches us. And that's why the creation story has a lot of these principles, and I've just acted upon a lot of them with you. This again is the group that hiked in 1998 through the Earl Grey Pass. This is, I don't know if anybody on here, if Mark Thomas is on this or not, but that's Mark Thomas standing there. And that's the tree. It gives you, and Mark's about what, 6'2", something like that. So this gives you a bit of an idea of how precious that place is and how long that that tree has been alive. And so I think, are we going to stop there, or what have I got?
We're at like, we're just under 20 minutes now.
Okay, so does that mean I have time?
No, it means we should be going into the second
Okay.
break, really.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. Okay, so Nadine is again going to put you in breakout rooms. I think they'll be slightly different, folks.
Yes, and I just wanted to check, Michelle, are we using the same 2 questions that we had originally discussed?
Yes, you can.
Okay. So I will put those in the chat.
I'm back. I didn't have a chance to chat with Michelle on the break. We have about 12 minutes remaining in the session. And so Michelle, it's your 12 minutes to do whatever you would like with in terms of presentation. If you want to take some time for Q&A, we just need a couple minutes at the end to close out. So the next 10 minutes are completely yours.
And I also want to apologize for folks that those questions did not transfer in the chat. Lesson learned. When you put them in the chat here, they don't move to the breakout room. So hopefully you got them between the chat and the broadcast. I'm sure there was lots to talk about.
I'm not sure how we lost time. So I think what I would like to do is just go a little bit, I'm just going to jump over. I'm going to show you what came out of the Ktunaxa model of the perception of the welfare of our children, which was the master's thesis. And this model, cosmic centric, informed by over 100 Ktunaxa people that I spoke to over the summer of 1998. And in this model shows how we are impacted when systems are removed, good, bad, and indifferent, but influences who we are, how we are, and where we are. But the creation of that ethical space. And so, you know, there's a lot of talk right now about that ethical space. What is that ethical space? And so back in 1998, Ktunaxa recognized an ethical space. Our knowledge holders, the people I shared this model with who informed this model, And it is here. It is the space in between. The colonial impacts are coming, but they almost become that vicious circle. And so in that vicious circle, it's quite tight, but it doesn't quite get to us, to our heart, right? To the center of who we are, because we're still Ktunaxa, we're still doing our work, we're still, perpetuating our culture and finding ways to do so. And so when we look at things like the models of two-eyed seeing, for example, there is an assumption about that model, about equity of knowledge systems, which doesn't exist. When you look at two-eyed seeing from the Mi'kmaq and how the work that I have read from that elder, he is very specifically trying to address an issue of the Mi'kmaq in their research relationships in Mi'kmaq homelands. The fact that it's been co-opted and is being brought elsewhere is very similar to what happened with the medicine wheel work, right? From the Blackfoot people, from the Pine Ridge people, and the ceremonies don't come along with it. And I think that's a really important part for us to remember, that there are ceremonies about all of this that are happening that we continue to activate and to act upon. And so when we talk about how things get co-opted, I worked for a research unit at UBC, and this is what they started doing. They took the social determinants of health and decided, oh, this is how we're going to address all those social issues. You can just address them this way. Again, coming from the outside, looking at the issues, it was not an Indigenous model. It was still actually looking and perpetuating the colonialism, the imperialism, and just looking at the vicious circle. And so it's the meaning making. It's the freedom for us to make meaning of our lives and our existence and our futures. That is really what we're talking about when we're talking about creating that ethical space. And so for myself, as an academic in my homelands, wanting to do my PhD work, I started to look at the creation story as methodology. And I think every single creation story, every single set of stories that Indigenous people have in their places actually provides methodologies and methods and principles for how our knowledge relationships are supposed to work, that need to be respected. And so I just wanted to share with you a little bit about the Gatmuk Declaration. I'm going to go very quickly here, but we have been taking the creation story and helping that to inform how we move forward with that work, and grounding that work in our belief system, in our spiritual relationship and understanding first, before the legal. First, because the law, the precedent law for us is not Canada law, not Aboriginal law, not environmental law. It is actually Napika law, Acnus Musticis, natural law, and that we know. And so we also have a concept called Ukinishwit, which is means one heart, a group of people with, having one heart together to work on a problem or resolve a problem. This comes from, this translation comes from my cousin, Dr. Chris Horsleaf, who, trying to help people understand. And I know that he has been informed by a number of our spiritual and cultural interpreters, helping us to understand. And so I'm going to end just with the work that I started doing in my PhD. That actually is a lot of the pieces of this presentation, which, by the way, was a graduate studies course that I've taught for master's level students. I've taught for for undergraduate. I've taught high school students. I've taught community members. I've done in a workshop, usually is 2 days. You got the quick and dirty in an hour and a half. And you should be left with a whole bunch of questions, and hopefully you will take that responsibility and further look for more information. But this is what came out of my PhD work, is that we tend to be taught at the universities this ivory tower. Those of you who are familiar with that acronym, or sorry, that analogy of the ivory tower. And the ivory tower is definitely disciplined knowledge, right? We don't learn about ontologies, right? We don't learn about cosmologies. We only start talking about ethics if we're going to do research, but we don't actually learn. We really get focused on what is the method my discipline wants me to know to be able to access knowledge. And so for Indigenous people, there's a whole lot of pieces that are missing, including our vision, right? Place-based knowledge, our ontologies, our lived experiences. So when people start putting me together with all the other Indigenous people, that's an unethical process because I'm not like everybody else. I am not the same. And that skews our data. It codes our data for whiteness, for disconscious racism. And so our cosmologies, our creation stories, our understanding of what our roles and responsibilities are within this world, and our ethics, right? Our value, how we value knowledge, whose knowledge we value, who gets to speak to what, which is why I had, for example, Francis and Joe speak ahead of me. And so how I applied that for my work, for looking at our work as Ktunaxa people, was going back to our nation vision statement and understanding, going back to the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples that I said earlier about research and information is directly tied to our nation rebuilding, our self-determination. And so we have to figure out what is that pathway for us to get to to fulfill our vision for ourselves and who we are. And so I leave you with this. Husuket kokne na guts hasis takti manachla krishka kapsin. And Francis, I hope I said that good. I've been given those words by Sophie Pierre when I went to Oxford because I wanted to speak Ktunaxa in Oxford University because I didn't think that had ever happened before. And so she said it's about thanking the people for taking time to think about these big ideas. And so thank you very much, all of you, for sharing some time. And that's all I got there, Candace. My hope is that people might leave one word or one sentence about one thing you got out of this as the evaluation, because normally I like evaluations, I like feedback. And don't just tell me it was good, tell me what you thought, what part of it was good for you, right? And tachas.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Michelle. And we definitely have that question in the feedback form. And I just really want to say a big thanks to Michelle for your teaching, for the history, our story, and I think really challenging us to take responsibility and be part of change and behave in a good way, in a right way. And thank you all participants for diving in and being willing for us to be a little bit uncomfortable, but to really listen and learn and be in dialogue with some of these challenging questions. We also want to thank the Vancouver Foundation. They've been our sponsor for these series. We're really grateful about that, and we hope to continue this series. This is sort of the last one in this series that's been happening this fall and winter, but we have applied for funding to continue this work, and including in some expanded formats. And so we'll let you know how that goes. If you do have questions coming out of this, Michelle is available through her website, michellesam.com, and I'll send you that link in the follow-up email as well. So that's a place where you could ask some questions. I know we didn't have time for questions here today, and so I'll send you a follow-up email with that, as well as a recording of the presentation and a link to the survey. It just takes about 5 minutes to do the survey. Again, Michelle would really appreciate that feedback, and we really appreciate any ideas and interest that you have for future sessions. It's been really wonderful to see the response, the uptake to these workshops, which is a signal to us that people want to keep coming and want more. And so if you have specific interests or needs, questions, topics, we'd love to hear from you. And that feedback form is a way to do that. Feel free to also email me Candace directly. And once again, y2y.net/ethical space is where we hold the resources and the recordings and information about this project. So thanks very much. Stay in touch and have a great day.
And I
If
wanted to
you
also thank
Google
Francis.
me, oh, sorry, I was just gonna say, if you Google me, I will show up. And there's some videos as well from a past life when I was doing a lot of research. So, yeah. Go ahead, Jen.
Noting the single L in Michelle, in case you get lost out there in Google land.
Yes.
And thank you, Francis and Chief Pierre as well, for opening today. Appreciated that very much. So stay tuned. Hopefully, more ethical space offerings to come. Thanks very much, everybody.
On Winniget. See you later, not goodbye. On Winniget.
Thank you.